Your Excellency, thank you very much for taking part in our interview and for receiving us in your garden.
We're very happy you're here.
Thank you. Could I start with some economic topics? So financial and economic crisis in Europe still is ongoing. On the other hand, in US, it's getting better. The role of Fed here is great and decisive. With primary emission of dollars, Fed indirectly promotes consumption in US. But on the other hand, Europe swears on saving. What, in your opinion, is right solution for getting balanced?
Well, to be honest, and at the risk of sounding like a real diplomat for a change, I think both sides have a good argument. I think that in the US, maybe we're doing too much stimulation and at the risk of making the deficit even worse. But on the other, Europe is so focused on austerity that it's forgetting it also needs to stimulate the economies. Here we are in this garden, it's the same with plants. You need to prune them. The more you prune them, the stronger they grow and the faster they grow. But if you prune them too much, then they die. So there has to be this balance in nature and in economies where you both stimulate and cut.
Which sectors, maybe in Europe, we can cut? We have still maneuver.
I think both in America and in Europe, but more so in Europe, it's the public sector. I think in Slovenia, you've added tens of thousands of public sector jobs in the last decade. And that was one way to cover up the unemployment problem, but it's not a good way because those public sector jobs don't usually produce anything. They're just more bureaucrats like me. And how many of those do you really need? So I think there could be a lot of cutting there. And at the same time, you need to work on pensions throughout Europe. The pension systems are really just too lucrative. And the pensioners need to also share the sacrifice and not only the younger generation. And at the same time, with the money you save, you could do investments in the private sector, infrastructure improvements and things like that.
Okay, so if we can go back to America, U.S. national debt exceeds 16 trillion and it's still increasing. How long will you be able to maintain the debt at this rate, and how will this affect on your economy?
Yeah, that goes back to my concern that we're already stimulating the economy too much. I think America has this great advantage that it's so big, so rich, that it could do pretty much whatever it wants, unlike Slovenia, which is more forced by the EU to do certain things and be more disciplined. But in the long term, the problem for America may be greater because it can't just be so undisciplined and irresponsible for so long. So we really need to stop now and really have a package between the Congress and the President on ways to cut the budget.
Mm-hmm. Which ways you will cut the budget?
I think there's several. I would start with the military. The Cold War's been over a long time now, and we still have huge conventional forces. I think we need new forces, more flexible, more able to counter terrorist attacks and things like that. But the defense budget continues to grow without any real rational reason other than vested interests. I also think the Social Security system needs to be cut. I complain about Europe and Slovenia's pensions, but in America too, a lot of people who don't need pensions are getting them. And people are not investing enough in their pensions. And so that deficit is also increasing a lot. And beyond that, health issues. Health takes up more and more of our budget every year. People are living longer. I guess that's a good thing, but it does make life more expensive for the younger generations.
And the basic health insurance system, for example, for all the citizens, like we have in Europe, also Canada has this system. The United States just cannot put into the practice. Why there is so much opposition from various politicians and lobbies against it?
I think it's a number of things. One is Americans have always had a real suspicion of anything that smacked of socialism. And they fear that another bureaucracy, and I sympathize with this to a large extent, that bureaucracies are insensitive, unfeeling creatures, and they just go by the book. And if you have a health system that just is very bureaucratic, then you don't get the personal touch that you want. It's cheaper and it's more fair in a sense because everyone's taken care of, but it also means that The doctors are just more bureaucrats than scientists or artists or humanitarians. I see that even in Slovenia to some extent. You have rules. A woman who maybe her parents, her mother had breast cancer at 50, still the rule is you don't get a mammogram until you're 45 or 50. And in America, you'd be more flexible. You could have the tests you want when you want them. But here things are more rigid because it's state managed.
But you actually have to have the money in America.
That is the problem. And so you're right. It's like our education system. If you're rich or middle class, it's a little easier. And I think President Obama has done a good thing by trying to make sure everyone at least has some health insurance.
Maybe in the sphere of maintaining peace in the world, U.S. as a global superpower has a much merit since the critical role of the Second World War to the balance in the Cold War. However, there have also been some unfortunate moves like Vietnam War, Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan. In your opinion, do you think it's still necessary to resolve these international conflicts with the army, or will in the future have more competences also business and the financial dialogue?
You know, war is always something that looks really terrific from a distance. It's very romantic and heroic, but when you come right down to war, it's a very ugly, disgusting thing. So you should always be limiting war to when it's really crucial and essential. And that was my complaint about the Iraq War from the beginning, and of course when I was younger, the Vietnam War. I think some wars will always be necessary because there are evil people and there are evil ideologies that need to be countered. But I think there's been an excess use of force. And the times when, on the other hand, there are times when we probably should have used force more quickly, like in Rwanda, and we could have saved 1 million lives with a very small amount of military intervention. And at other times we've put in so much military effort for very little gain. Part of it is we just aren't that smart all the time, and it's hard to see the future. But war should always be a very last resort, because wars always lead to civilian deaths and atrocities. The best trained, most honorable men, when they're in a war situation, will do terrible things, so we should avoid that as much as possible.
Slovenia is a small country. Do you think we need army in Slovenia?
I think you do as a NATO ally, but I think you now are coming to the right type of army that you need. I think 10 years ago, Slovenes had this notion of a heavily armored brigade or something, and that's just silly for a country of 2 million people. I think light troops, special operation forces, those are the key to the future anyway. If Slovenia is in Afghanistan with even just 10 or 12 special ops forces, it's better than a few tanks. And that's the sort of, and in the Balkans as well. Your army is very good. Frankly, you're man for man, women for women. Your troops are among the very best in the world. I once facetiously said they're so good it's hard to believe they're European. But they're really wonderful troops, but they have to be smart troops. They shouldn't be heavy troops. We don't need that except in a conventional war.
Maybe I would like to continue with the topics from the politics. In US you have two major political parties that exchange in power, but when it comes to the core decisions, these two parties actually participate. Contrary in Slovenia, we have actually a set of political parties which are very uncooperative among each other, and leaders mainly care for their own interest. What do we need to handle this situation in Slovenia, that politics will get sense and the wisdom actually to work for the benefit of the country?
Yeah, I fear part of the problem is structural. Being a country of only 2 million, people know each other too well. And that leads to a lot of personal animosities and grudges and favors on the other side. So people are connected either in good ways or bad ways with each other. And in America, 300 million people, you may get angry with somebody about a particular thing, but it's not as personal. Here everything is. Part of it is the size of the country. Part of it is World War II, that still Slovenes haven't come to grips with the the situation from World War II and the post-World War II crimes and the communist era. All of those things need to be talked out, and there needs to be some consensus developed in Slovenia where people respect each other and they could hold different views, but they could still accept that in the past people on both sides were good and people on both sides were bad, and that today everyone needs to be striving to make Slovenia a better place. I think that's going to happen with the next generation. I think it's probably too late for this older generation. There's a lot of bitterness, and I don't see that going away.
What about the consciousness of the Slovenian nation? Americans who travel abroad are proud to represent us Americans. You're proud on your brands, on your products. But maybe contrary, most Slovenes have the mindset that Slovenian brands are worthless until they are taken over from the foreigners. What do you think, is that so?
I'm not sure that's completely true. I find Slovenes to have a certain quiet patriotism, and they're very proud of their country for the most part. They're embarrassed by their governments. They're embarrassed by most of their politicians. But I like to think that Slovenes realize that they're very talented and most of their products are good. The products that aren't good there's a certain truth to this, that when they're state managed, there's not as much innovation, there isn't as much focus on improving the management of a company or the products that are placed, and that's why privatization is crucial to this country. But whether it's privatized with foreigners or real Slovene businessmen, it doesn't much matter.
After the 3 years of your mandate in Slovenia, what do you think America can give to Slovenia? What can Slovenia give to America?
America needs to pay more attention to Slovenia. To be honest, and I've said this often, everyone when I came out here said, Slovenia is a beautiful country, no problems, just go have fun for 3 years. And we've tried to change that attitude in America, that it is a beautiful country, but it does have its problems, and it could be an important ally in the Balkans and in Afghanistan and frankly in the whole Eurozone. So we should focus more attention on it. We don't get enough high-level visits here. We don't get enough. There's so many crises elsewhere in the world and even nearby that as long as things are going okay, nobody really it's like, children. The bad children get all the attention. The good ones are ignored. And if there's a war in Egypt or Syria or the Balkans are falling apart, then that's where your attention goes. So we need to pay more attention here. For Slovenia toward America, I think you're doing what you need to do. Whether you have leftist governments or right governments, you're a good ally. We don't agree on everything all the time. I was very upset a couple of years ago when the Iranian foreign minister was allowed to come. But for the most part, Slovenia and America see eye to eye on human rights, on democracy, on just about everything. So it's not bad.
You mentioned that in Slovenia we have not enough foreigner visits. What do you think we should do better, or maybe to be more attractive also for these foreigner visits?
Slovenia is sort of at a crossroads, and it's been at this crossroads for 20 years. It is a NATO ally, but it also still feels it's sort of part of the non-aligned movement. It is sort of a capitalist economy, but it's also still a socialist economy. It really hasn't chosen yet what path it's going to go down. It keeps going down both paths at the same time, and it's not a very good way to move. So until Slovenia gets out of that transitional state, and when it decides if it's really truly a Western ally or whether it's really truly still with the non-aligned movement from the Yugoslav days, there's a certain level, a plateau from which our bilateral relationship cannot develop further.
Your Excellency, let me conclude, and at the end, please tell us the most special place in Slovenia for you.
Oh gosh, now I'll have most of the Slovenes angry with me. But to be very honest, while Sharon and I enjoy traveling all over the country, the place that I find the most soothing is Piran. I like having the water there, the old Roman town. it's very beautiful, and with the sea breezes, that's the place that I find the most relaxing whenever I get the chance to go down to Piran. But I still like all the rest of them also.
At the end, is anything maybe to say that you would like to say to Slovenes?
That I'll miss this country very much. It's a country that that at least I was not comfortable in as soon as I landed. It's not a country where I found the people to be overly gregarious and extroverted, but over time I've come to be very attached to the people and the country. So ironically, it'll be probably the hardest country for me to leave.
Your Excellency, thank you very much, and please have my best wishes for the future.
Thank you.